Imagine, like, a 48-minute window.
Yeah, that is not a lot of time at all.
Right. I mean, in less time than it takes to watch, a single episode of a TV show, 3 young children vanish into the dark.
Wow.
Yeah, it triggers this massive multi-beach manhunt right in the middle of the night, and it forges this legal timeline that ultimately results in a 20 years to life prison sentence.
It really is a staggering sequence of events.
It is. So welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we are breaking down the anatomy of a tragedy, and we're bringing you along with us. We're looking at a case that just completely devastated a New York community.
Truly devastating.
Yeah, and our mission today is to cut through the noise. We're going to parse through the raw facts, the procedural timeline, and of course, the final legal conclusion here.
And to do that effectively, we are pulling from some really detailed news reports. We're leaning heavily on the on-the-ground coverage from CNN's Mark Morales and All At Last.
Right, their reporting was crucial.
Exactly. Their reporting gives us the factual framework of what happened to these 3 children and the subsequent sentencing of their mother, who is 34-year-old Erin Merdy.
And, when you look at the sheer scale of the heartbreak in these reports, the instinct is to just focus entirely on the emotional weight of it all.
Because it's just so heavy.
It is. But to really understand the 20 years to life sentence that was handed down on a Wednesday nearly 4 years later, we have to sort of strip away the emotion for a second.
Right, which is hard to do.
Very hard. But okay, let's unpack this. We have to look at the exact minute-by-minute timeline the prosecutors laid out. Because without that rigid framework, the legal resolution we're seeing today simply doesn't exist.
That's spot on, because time is the primary currency in any criminal proceeding.
Yeah.
When prosecutors are dealing with first-degree murder charges, they cannot rely on just like a general narrative. They have to establish a chronological spine that can actually withstand the intense scrutiny of a defense team.
So let's trace that spine. Right. We are anchoring this deep dive on the night of September 12, 2022. That's almost 4 years ago now.
Right.
According to the reporting, the prosecution's timeline starts definitively at 12:37 a.m.
Which is very specific.
Exactly. That is the exact moment they established that Erin Merdy took her 3 children to the beach at Coney Island.
And what's fascinating here is how critical that 12:37 a.m. timestamp is. In modern investigations, a timestamp like that is rarely an approximation.
Right, it's not a guess.
No, it's usually corroborated by hard digital evidence.
Yeah.
So we're talking security cameras on the boardwalk, ring cameras on nearby apartments, or cell phone location data.
Wow. Yeah.
It provides a really concrete, undeniable starting line for all the events that follow.
Right, and the finish line for that specific sequence of events comes just 48 minutes later.
It's just 48 minutes.
Yeah. At about 1:25 a.m., the timeline shifts drastically. Merdy is documented walking from the beach toward the apartment of the father of her youngest child.
And she's alone at this point.
She is entirely alone. And she begins calling family members. She's visibly upset. And crucially, she refuses to answer any questions about where the children are.
That 48-minute gap is really the crux of the entire legal case.
Right, it's like this terrifying black box.
Exactly.
So why do prosecutors focus so heavily on these hyper-specific minute-by-minute timestamps like 12.37 and 1.25 in their official statements?
Well, a first-degree murder timeline is essentially like building an airtight room. The prosecution is using those 2 timestamps to build the walls.
Okay, I see.
By establishing exactly when she had the children in her custody and then exactly when she was seen walking away without them, they suck all the oxygen out of the room for any alternate theories.
Wow. So the defense has literally nowhere to breathe.
Right. It creates a closed perimeter because a prosecutor's main job is to eliminate all the what-ifs.
Yeah, that makes sense.
If they leave the timeline vague, a defense attorney can easily introduce reasonable doubt. They could suggest, someone else intercepted the family or that the children just wandered off over a span of several hours.
Right, which complicates everything.
Absolutely. By locking down that really tight 48-minute window, the prosecution isolates the event. They're declaring to the court that the crime occurred exclusively within the specific testable parameter.
I mean, I understand the mechanical necessity of it, but it is deeply chilling to look at it on paper.
It really is.
You are reducing this massive, totally incomprehensible human tragedy into, mathematical data points. 3 lives ended, and the justice system essentially processes it as a calculation between point A and point B.
Yeah, but the justice system actually has to process it that way because the alternative is chaos.
That's a good point.
A courtroom just cannot function on raw emotion. It has to turn that devastating reality into a chronological narrative that can be proven beyond a reasonable doubt.
Right.
The precision you're talking about is literally the only way the law can ensure accountability.
And that focus on accountability is really what drives the immediate aftermath of that 1.25 a.m. timestamp. Because the moment she makes those phone calls and refuses to disclose the children's location, that tightly controlled timeline just explodes.
Yeah, it's shattered.
It explodes into this frantic, chaotic search.
Because that refusal to answer questions is the ultimate catalyst for the panic. It signals an immediate, severe deviation from normal behavior.
Right, and the sources outline that the father of the youngest child, along with other family members, instantly went out to look for her and called 911.
Rightfully so.
And here is where the geography of that night becomes just as important as the timeline itself. Because we aren't talking about searching, a contained building or a house.
No.
We're talking about the shoreline of Brooklyn in the middle of the night.
And geography basically dictates the entire methodology of a search like this. Well, when first responders and family members hit a beach at 2 a.m., they are fighting a massive information vacuum.
Right.
They're dealing with pitch darkness, this vast expanse of sand, ocean currents, and shifting tides. It's incredibly difficult terrain.
Yeah. And eventually, family members did locate Merdy, but not where the timeline started. They found her in nearby Brighton Beach.
Which is quite a ways off.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The physical distance between Coney Island and Brighton Beach really underscores the sheer confusion of that night. And the reports note a very specific, stark detail here.
What was it?
When they found her, she was wet, she was barefoot, and she told them the children were gone. And she apologized.
That is just wow. Finding her wet and barefoot, offering an apology but providing absolutely no specific location, that changes the entire nature of the operation.
Right.
Law enforcement actually refers to this as a pivot point.
A pivot point.
Yeah. The family and the police are no longer just looking for a mother who took a late-night walk. That specific combination of physical evidence, the wet clothing, the bare feet, combined with the statement "they're gone," quietly shifts the posture of the response.
Oh, I see.
It moves it from a standard missing persons inquiry straight toward a potential recovery operation.
God, that's heavy.
Yeah.
And, I look at the news headlines surrounding this case, and they so often compress the events to make them sound instantaneous.
Oh, absolutely. They always do.
Right. You read the summaries and it feels like a single contained event. But the reality on the ground was agonizingly drawn out. The contrast here is just devastating for you to think about.
It really is.
You have the mother found first in Brighton Beach, interacting with family. But the children were left alone out there in the dark for hours.
The time gap between locating the mother and finding the children is really substantial.
It is. It wasn't until about 4:30 a.m. that police finally discovered them.
Hours later.
Yeah, hours. They were unresponsive, wet, and sand-covered on the Coney Island shoreline. They were rushed to Coney Island Hospital, where they were officially pronounced dead.
Just heartbreaking.
It is. And when you look at that geographic spread from the apartment to Brighton Beach to Coney Islands, combined with a 3-hour delay in the dark, it completely shatters any illusion that this was a neat, orderly investigation.
Oh, for sure.
It was a terrifying, chaotic scramble.
And that discovery at 4:30 a.m. wasn't just the end of a tragic search. It was the exact moment the legal clock started ticking.
Right.
The evidence gathered on the sand that morning, the condition of the victims, the location, the physical reality is what cornered the defense.
Absolutely.
But before we discuss the legal mechanisms that followed, we really have to ground this deep dive in the actual human toll.
Yes, we do.
Because when we analyze timelines and police procedures so clinically, the victims can really easily become abstractions.
I agree completely. And the sources do provide us with their names and their ages. And honestly, reading them out loud fundamentally changes how you process the rest of this case.
It really grounds it.
It does. We were talking about Zachary Merdy, who was 7 years old, Liliana Stevens Merdy, who was 4, and Oliver Bondarev, who was just 3 months old.
A 7-year-old, a 4-year-old, and an infant. I mean, the scale of the vulnerability there is absolute.
It is entirely absolute. Hearing that Oliver was only 3 months old makes the transition to the legal resolution feel incredibly heavy.
Yeah.
You have 3 innocent lives lost,
Yeah.
and the only tool society has left to address it is Basically, the sterile machinery of the courts.
Because the law is inherently limited in cases like this, it cannot offer restoration.
Right, it can't fix it.
Exactly. It cannot turn back the clock to 12:36 a.m.
Yeah.
The only mechanism available to the state is accountability. Which brings us to the strategic legal maneuvers that concluded this case.
Right, and those maneuvers actually moved pretty quickly toward the end.
They did.
According to the reports, Erin Merdy pleaded guilty in March to 3 counts of first-degree murder. And following that plea, on a Wednesday, the judge handed down the official sentence, 20 years to life in prison.
And the sources also note that Merdy's attorney did not immediately respond to requests for comment.
Yeah, that stood out to me because I look at a guilty plea in a case with this much public attention, and I see the defense doing extreme damage control.
Oh, absolutely.
They know a jury trial with that airtight 48-minute timeline we talked about would be an absolute bloodbath for them.
For sure. A guilty plea in a multiple homicide case is almost always a calculated intersection of damage control and, what the legal system considers trauma mitigation.
Wait, trauma mitigation for the family?
For the family, yes, but also for the first responders and for the community at large.
Why is it?
Taking a case like this to trial means the prosecution has to publicly dismantle that timeline in front of a jury. It means putting the family members who searched the beach on the witness stand.
Wow.
It means the police officers who made the discovery at 4:30 a.m. have to testify to exactly what they saw on the sand. It forces literally everyone involved to relive the most horrific night of their lives in open court.
That makes a lot of sense. So the justice system essentially weighs the cost of a trial against the certainty of a conviction.
Precisely.
A guilty plea basically circumvents the public trauma and guarantees a conviction without the risk of appeals dragging on for decades.
It brings the procedural nightmare to a definitive halt. It secures the conviction on all 3 counts of first-degree murder immediately.
But, here is what I struggle with, and I imagine anyone looking at this sentence struggles with it too.
What's that?
The judge handed down 20 years to life. We were talking about 3 separate lives taken: Zachary, Liliana, and Oliver.
Right.
How does the legal framework justify a baseline of 20 years when 3 people were murdered? Like, why isn't the sentence mathematically multiplied?
That's a really common question. It actually comes down to the mechanics of concurrent versus consecutive sentencing in New York State. When multiple crimes are committed as part of a single continuous incident, like the events within that 48-minute window, the sentences are often structured to run concurrently as part of the plea agreement.
So they are served at the same time.
Exactly. Served at the exact same time.
So the 20 years isn't the court saying 3 lives are only worth 2 decades?
No, not at all. The court is establishing a mandatory minimum. They are setting a really rigid floor of 20 years before the parole board will even open the file.
Okay, that makes more sense.
And the crucial part of that sentence is the ta-life tale. Given the severity of the charges, 3 counts of first-degree murder involving children, the probability of parole being granted at that 20-year mark is heavily, heavily weighed against the defendant.
Wow.
The state is essentially securing the ability to keep her incarcerated for the rest of her natural life, but without forcing the family through a grueling trial.
Okay, yeah. That context completely changes how you read the statements released by the officials involved.
It really does.
Because Brooklyn District Attorney Eric Gonzalez articulated the gravity of this conclusion very specifically. He stated that the children's lives were taken in the, quote, most heartbreaking and unthinkable way.
And if we connect this to the bigger picture, unthinkable is really the operative word there.
Yeah.
The district attorney is acknowledging the emotional abyss of the case before pivoting straight to the legal objective. He went on to say, "We sought the strongest possible accountability in this devastating case, and while nothing can bring these children back, this sentence ensures the defendant will be held responsible for taking their lives."
Yeah, he leans entirely on the concepts of accountability and responsibility there.
Right.
Because the law recognizes its own impotence in the face of death. Nothing can bring these children back.
It's sobering.
It is a stark admission that the scales of justice can never actually be balanced when innocent lives are lost. I mean, all the state can offer is the absolute guarantee that the action carries a severe, permanent consequence.
And, it demystifies the process for us. When we see a headline about a tragedy and a subsequent sentencing, we are only seeing the extreme bookends.
The crime of the punishment.
Exactly.
But diving into the sources shows us the complex scaffolding in between. It shows us how a 48-minute gap in the middle of the night becomes the structural foundation of a first-degree murder charge.
Right.
It reveals how a chaotic 3-hour search across 2 different Brooklyn beaches gets distilled into an undeniable evidentiary timeline. And that timeline leaves the defense team with no viable option but a guilty plea.
And understanding the mechanics of that process really gives us a much clearer picture of how society attempts to maintain order.
Yeah.
The legal system cannot fix the broken pieces, but it can organize them, process them, and assign a definitive consequence.
It takes us on a complete journey. From the desperate, frantic search on the Coney Island shoreline to the sterile, highly structured environment of a courtroom where a gavel falls and a 20 years to life sentence is permanently entered into the record.
It does. The legal documents give us absolute certainty. We know the exact timestamps. We know the physical geography from the apartment to the Brighton Beach boardwalk to the water's edge.
Right.
We understand the legal standard of concurrent sentencing that led to the plea deal, but there is a massive void that the legal framework simply cannot address.
So what does this all mean? What is that void?
The human element.
Yeah.
A case file acts like an X-ray. It shows us exactly where and when the fracture happened. It gives us all the data.
But the data isn't the whole story.
Right, because what the data leaves out is the enduring transformation of the space itself. I want you to consider the everyday reality of that neighborhood shoreline.
Yep.
Coney Island and Brighton Beach are places where families gather, right?
Yeah.
Where people walk in the morning, where a community lives its daily life.
Yeah, it's a neighborhood.
Exactly. But within a mere 48 minutes, that familiar, ordinary geography was permanently transformed into a site of irreversible tragedy.
Wow. Yeah, the law wraps up the timeline, but it can't unwrite the history of that beach.
Exactly. The court has spoken, the plea is entered, and the sentence is set. But the impact of that transformation on the surviving family members, the first responders who searched the dark water that night, and the entire surrounding community is profound.
It's completely devastating.
The justice system brings closure to the case file, but the landscape of that community carries the echo of those 48 minutes long after the final gavel falls.